Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings with a helping extra side of welcome to the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quest. My name is Tristan Watty, and I'm joined by the marvelous, the mysterious Mr. Mayhem himself, Russ. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Happy Monday, Tristan, and also happy May 4th.
Oh, yes. I've been waiting for this day, right? Because the puns that I have prepared for today are going to be extra forceful, let's just say. I tried with that one. But what I also have to try with is reintroducing ourselves a little bit further to those first-time joiners because it's the right thing to do. So, again, my name is Tristan Watty, and I come to you from the Professional Services Division of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, form, and way. And I am joined by...
Me, I am Russ. I come from the Security Incident Response Team, where we help you contain and mitigate your security incidents and investigations.
Yes, Russ. I always try to speak like Yoda backwards, but it just doesn't work out for me. So I won't. But I will say hi to producer Jeff. As always, thank you for joining and thank you for producing, right? And the puns are starting already. For better or for worse. So we will start. ZN, thank you for joining. Let's go ProServe, right? Yeah. So today's episode is going to be an interesting one. We gave away some of what the title is meaningful to you about, or words are hard sometimes. So I tried to do it backwards. I can't. So I'll just do it normal. So, Russ, where did we come from last week so we can go forward this week? If you saw what I did there.
That would be a tough one to do, though. So yeah, that was good. I'll give you that one. Okay, so last week our episode was Go Beyond plus logging, centralized logging for incident response. You're only going to get the jokey anime thing from last week. You go back and watch last week's episode, and you can see that. But you don't need to have watched it in order to understand what we're going to talk about today, which is these aren't the logs you're looking for. Centralized logging for AWS incident response.
Yes. So it's interesting because we spoke about logging last week, and it was like, all right, what else do we have to dive into? Well, that's where the topic of logging kind of keeps going because there's so many facets, so many things to consider when you are setting up security logging within your environment. The one thing I would preference everything is go read the Security Incident Response white paper. It has some really great details in there that we will touch upon throughout the episode. But I think one of the pieces that we want to do before we jump right in is just say, hey, where's everybody tuning in from? See, we got to keep you on your toes. You thought we were going to skip it this week. No, because we have great icebreakers like we always do. So
I'm coming in from Mustafar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so keep
so, Russ, would you rather have a robot vacuum that works flawlessly but sings opera while cleaning, or a self-cleaning toilet that judges your bathroom habits?
I don't know why the second is even an option. I'm going to go with the robot vacuum that works flawlessly and sings opera while cleaning. To me, that's just dinner and a show.
Dinner and a show. But the thing is, if the robot is going, that means it's singing opera. That means if you're watching your favorite show on any channel, robot is singing. Just a tidbit. And fun. Okay. Thank you for joining from India. And Jeff is taking the vacuum. I don't need to be judged more. It's interesting because you think of your bathroom habits, and it could just be as simple as, oh, I think I look good in this shirt. And then the toilet will have something different to say about it. So you never know. But
yeah,
no
that sounds
potty
like
humor today. No potty humor today. So we'll skip on.
That sounds like the like an animation, like a cartoon character for like a Adult Swim type, cartoon.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a sassy, judgmental toilet.
that helps you with life lessons.
And also tells you you're ugly.
But what it won't tell you is how to optimize your logs, just reserved for us. So let us jump into that. See, transitions.
Somewhat. Can the toilet judge our logging?
It depends.
Strategy.
Are your logs being centralized so that they can read all the logs coming from your environment? That's 2 points for me. And 10 billion points for those who are joining today. So as we continue speaking about today's topic of centralized logging, today is May the 4th, so we want to have a little bit of fun episode. So what we really want to get to is these are not the logs you're looking for, right? How do you exactly assemble your AWS telemetry that you need? This is a key aspect that we touched upon a little bit last week, and we kind of want to dive deeper into this week, right? Because a lot of the factors of your incident response strategy comes into, hey, what is your incident responder actually looking at? How did they get alerted, right? What shows up in the dashboard? What are the playbooks that are linked to what shows up in the dashboard? There's so many variables that come from this, but the key source is the source, right? Are you getting GuardDuty findings? Are you getting VPC Flow Logs, Route 53 resolver queries, so on and so forth? These are all factors that you have to think about. Because if you are centralizing your log archives in a centralized log archive account based on the SRA design, and I say it 3 times for the people on the other side of the internet, for a specific reason of looking into the SRA and kind of the different accounts that go into it. The centralized log archiving account is one of those key pieces. And why? Because you start to figure out, okay, what logs go in there? Do you think about organizational trails versus account trails, which we touched upon? A Jedi chooses their path wisely. Or do you trust the archives? AKA, do you understand the chain of custody controls that you have within your environment? So when you start to jump in to your logs, you start to figure out all these different pieces of the puzzle. And Fun has this question: are these sessions recorded? This topic is important for me as a cloud network operation lead, but it is also midnight. Thank you for watching us at midnight, 1.
I was just about to say.
Yes, you are MVP. 2, yes, these are recorded. This is live on YouTube as well as Twitch. So you will be able to get back to it in the morning after you grab the beverage of your choice. So I'm glad to be the soothing sound of what you go to bed with, but I think the important part, right? Logging is
a little offended.
Soothing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a soothing topic. But I think the piece to start off with for us is the question. And that question is something along these lines. Which AWS log source saves your investigation most often? CloudTrail, VPC Flow Logs, Route 53, Config, GuardDuty, application/WAF logs. So, Russ, what do you see saves investigations the most often?
So I'm going to go with the important part of this question, which is most often. And I'm going to go with either CloudTrail or GuardDuty. CloudTrail for me personally, but I think GuardDuty for our customers is more often the driving factor for log sources rather than CloudTrail. But once we get into the IR cycle, it usually does turn into CloudTrail. That's especially because it's management events. It's like, hey, this is the high level of what happened, which services do I need to look into, all of those things. So that's why CloudTrail usually tends to be the, I'd say the savior, or at least helps you maybe dig down a little deeper into specific logs sources.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's an interesting thing. You touch upon a couple of different items. One is at what point of the investigation you're in, because are you the first incident responder, or are you the middle one? Or are you wrapping it up and you're trying to find out additional items? I think that all plays into the puzzle. And I'm curious to know what everybody thinks. Put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 in the chat. And with that being said, I think what you start to think about is, if I'm building, I have to know something is happening within my environment. Do I lean towards the GuardDuty finding / config findings, as Carr pointed out, going with config? Because how do you know if you have a fleet of EC2s, if something is happening with that one EC2? That's usually where my mind goes to first, right? What is out of the ordinary? You know, those two pictures you hold side by side where it's just like, all right, tell me what's the difference between this EC2 and this EC2. And that's kind of where my mind goes with config. So I'll go with Carr with config.
They're the same picture.
Yeah, they're the same. Tell me what you see. I see guardrails. So what we want to think about is, are these the logs you're looking for? And that's kind of where we wrapping around into the topic, if you see what we did there, right? Because when you start to delve into...
Easy, don't force it.
So if you look into CloudTrail management versus data events, I think that's one of the pieces to start off with discussing, right? If these are the logs you're looking for. Because management events, they tell you who did what to the control plane. As simple as that. So you think of IAM changes, you think of security group modifications, console logins, things like that. But if you want to delve deeper into it, did you see so-and-so via sign-in.amazon AWS.com? Did you see that? Because if you did see that chances are, if it's not one of your people, then you kind of want to see what's happening within your environment, right? This is kind of like if you were taking notes in a meeting, right? The minutes. If you picture, stick with me with an analogy, right? So you have the Jedi Council, you have this event happening, and somebody's taking minutes of what exactly is happening. Every decision that's being made. That's where you think of CloudTrail, right? But it's not taking notes of what's happening outside of the council meeting, right? So the people who are out on missions, it's not taking advantage of that. This is where we start to have the conversation about data events. They're a little bit more of the story, I would say plot points, or where the story lives. Let's just say that, right? So if you have S3 object levels, right, the gets, the puts, the Lambda functions, so on and so forth, what you start to get to is you have additional pieces of the puzzle, more of the story. This is data events are the holograms, right? So this is where you get the we need you, right? Those kind of things. That's what you're thinking of the data events. Could you deliver that via just a regular note? Yes. But you get more data, more realization to facial expressions, so on and so forth, right? That's the kind of details that you're looking for within data events, right? And these are valuable for forensic investigations, right? But the challenge is finding the balance between these two. Because those data events, the cost can go up because getting a hologram all the way from one planet to other planet could be a little bit expensive if you try to do that for every single thing. So that's where you have to be selective in your logging. And that is the key piece of this, right? So if you are designing your logging, you have to understand both events, right? One where you can log everything like minutes, but it's limited to what those exact items are. Then another one that gives you exact details. So this is where your decision framework starts to kick in, and you start to think of, okay, if a data exfiltration event happens within your environment, all right, and let's say you only have management events, will you know enough to figure out who did it, who had access, let's say, to an S3 bucket or something along those lines, what they took, so on and so forth. These are the things that you look at in a real scenario. Russ, am I going down the right path?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and I see it all the time. You can't make those determinations if you don't have those details, because what is data exfiltration? It's just outgoing data. Outgoing data is so common. So how do you find out when, this, 2 gigabyte exfil was malicious and this 2 gigabyte exfil was, part of your normal day-to-day operations, or a download of, some file that's larger. You need those more minute in the weed details once you're actually getting down to the nitty gritty of the incident, and looking to see what exactly happened and how the malicious actor was able to either get in and get the permissions to be able to go all the way through to data exfil, or confirm data exfil actually happened. Maybe they did get into the account, but they didn't get the opportunity to exfil. You basically just have question marks unless you have, some of that more detailed logging instead of just, management.
Yeah, and it's funny when you say question mark. My mind goes to that video game where you're found, the exclamation mark pops up over your head, but the person still continues to look for you. That's kind of what you get, right? You get a quick, something's wrong. What was that noise? But you don't know exactly where to pinpoint or look, right?
Yeah.
And
almost like there's a disturbance in the force, but we don't know specifically what happened.
See, I set it up. I'm glad you went down the route.
I stole it. I saw your setup and I was like, no, he's not getting this one.
See, we like to go with this, right? So I think part of the conversation is the other logs now. So we talked about the data events. We talked about the CloudTrail and the management events. Next, VPC Flow Logs. The logs that sometimes you really are looking for, right? But sometimes they're not there because, hey, there's so many logs coming in. Because this is what you go to when you want to see network level activities, right? This is the lateral movement between EC2 instances type of stuff. The unusual outbound connection, known bad IP, right? Those are the things you're looking for in VPC Flow Logs, right? You're getting a lot of this metadata. But the thing is since there's so much, what customers consider when they're setting up their framework is, okay, can I capture this somewhere else? Oh, we have a firewall. Everything goes through the firewall, so it should be captured there. But again, this is based on your network design, because what is tracking lateral movement within your environment? Right? What is the VPC traffic? These kind of things, right? These are the interesting paths you start to go down, because the flow logs tell you that, let's say, traffic happened, not what was in it. It just happened. And sometimes that's starting to paint the picture. And that's where you start to combine it with other logs, right? Because the VPC is the network level. Now you want to say, okay, I see this IP address. What did it resolve to? DNS entry. This is almost like we are going down Route 53, resolver queries, right? That's another piece, right? Because DNS is like the universal beacon. Malware almost doesn't, it does a DNS lookup for the most part, right? Before calling home. In a lot of the cases, I would say 88 point. I made that statistic up, but a lot of the time.
I was going to ask, where did you get that number?
See, disclaimer. I like to, the doctorate in me couldn't put out. I can't be, putting out false statistics. I just put out, hey, these are the facts. And part of those facts is VPC Flow Logs says something happened and DNS resolves. Usually something checks out with the DNS name because it resolves it to. And then what else doubles down on it is having something like a GuardDuty finding or something along those lines. But I would say Route 53 is also another service that is overlooked when you're looking at your entire logging strategy, because people often think of kind of the trifecta of the CloudTrail logs, GuardDuty findings, and then swapping config / GuardDuty, depending on the environment itself. But VPC Flow Logs, Route 53 resolver queries, they're important because it catches things that help to assist. And this is what we're trying to get to. We're building up a profile of something that is occurring from an incident response standpoint. You want to gather all these facets of data in order to have a better picture of what happened, when it happened, is it still happening, and going down that route. And to help you with is it still happening is going back to our earlier conversation of config. So CloudTrail tells you, hey, API call happened. Config tells you what resource looked like before and after. And that's critical because if security group was open to quad 0, you kind of want to know what it was before. Was it there currently? Was this a misconfiguration, honestly? Or did somebody deliberately say, open quad 0 to do some data exfiltration? Right? This is where we start to go down the lines. So, Russ, is painting this picture with config part of your go-to workflow in your head? Is like, okay, I got CloudTrail, now config. Tell me what changed.
Absolutely, and it's for that exact reason. You're looking at an API call that doesn't necessarily tell you all the context that you might want, and so when you're trying to determine whether something is malicious or just administrators doing things a little funky, I guess, that's where you're going to look to see, okay, was this change made so that way it could be publicly accessible to the internet for a certain amount of time, so that way one of the engineers working from home that day can access it, stuff like that. So that way you can go, okay, this was an accident, incidental, we'll just close out this security alert and maybe create a mechanism in the future that'll prevent people from doing that. But that's the difference between that and going and spinning up your entire IR cycle, getting people involved who will be very upset when they find out that it was just administrative and you spun up the whole process for no reason. So that's kind of what I think of, and that's why it's part of my regular workflow and how we run our incidents.
Yeah, it really comes down to kind of that perfect storm that usually happens, because what will happen is somebody wants to go on vacation and they're like, okay, I want to access the environment just in case something were to happen in the environment. So let me make this accessible from wherever. And then something gets crossed, and then all of a sudden that person's on the plane, and, and that's where you get the quick heartbeat from everybody on the call, right? That, hey, something's happening, right? Oh, we have an incident. So I think part of this also goes down to what we keep alluding to, GuardDuty, right? Because GuardDuty is playing a major role. This is your intelligence network, right? It generates the findings from the VPC Flow, DNS, the CloudTrail. You saw it kind of intertwine with everything, let's say. And this is essentially it's one of the backbones, right? When I say it's your intelligence network, it really is that, because it's sifting through so many things. So think of this you have Rebel Alliance and you have the Imperial transmissions, and then what you're trying to do is, hey, we want to make sure that we're not getting intercepted ourselves, right? Because we have plans, right? So how do you do so? Well, you want to make sure that you have mechanisms in place to protect yourself. You want to have things that, let's say, do not correlate you in the wrong way. And I'm being vague for a reason. And that reason is, what information are you conveying to the outside world versus what's conveyed within your world, within your AWS environment? And that's an important piece of the puzzle, because when you're looking to secure your environment, you're looking at a multifaceted approach, right? And part of that approach is understanding, hey, what logs do we have to enable? And then what services consume and ingest those logs? And for what purpose, right? Does it feed CloudTrail into GuardDuty, GuardDuty into Security Hub, right? Because Security Hub aggregates the findings across accounts, regions, third-party tools, so on and so forth. And then what do I do with that information? Well, it gives you the visibility to see what's happening in your environment, to see if somebody is intercepting or has spun up that quad 0 or whatever the case may be. These are all pieces of the puzzle. Yes, there are more that you can add to kind of beef up your starfighter, but what you want to get to is, you don't want to have that one weak point that somebody can take advantage of, right? You want to make sure
what is the size of that weak point?
I would say what size it is, but I would like the audience to guess where I'm going with it. 10 billion points to the person who says the size quote from the movie. So it's interesting because that's often the case. Is you have this huge mechanism environment. We have all the tools. We have this many SIMs in our environment, this many log pieces of segregation, but there's usually that one little piece that could have easily been filled, right? But it was there for whatever reason, right? And you don't want to have that one piece of exhaust in your environment that can be exploited. So how do you do so? You want to protect your environment in a certain way. You want to fortify your environment so that it affects, right? And Ari got it, the wampum rat. So this is why you start to have these separation of duties. This is why you have separate accounts. The log archiving account. This is where it starts to pop in. Russ, tell me why the log archive account is so important within an environment.
Well, yeah, so this is where all of these logs that we just talked about are going to live. And so when you have this information, you need to be able to secure it. You don't want someone coming in, with an older code that checks out. That's not what we're looking for here. So we're going to separate an account. That way, in case, say, your main production account gets compromised, you don't have to worry about the logs. The logs are outside of that account. That forces any sort of attacker to come in and not just compromise your production account, but also compromise your, let's call it the evidence account, because log archive is boring. But that's okay, because the log archive is supposed to be boring. It should be your most boring account in your organization. You don't want workloads. We don't want human IAM users. We don't want any of that. It's supposed to be purely archiving all of your logs, all of the telemetry that we just spoke about. And so that's kind of the reason why we want that separation, that that logical separation between your accounts that you use every day and the thing that you might need for evidence in a forensic investigation, or or for your lessons learned and how to up your security posture and have those things, taking the IR loop back from lessons learned to preparation. We need to prepare, and so getting into that our target state security strategy are well architected. There's like Tristan was saying, you don't want to give a very obvious target for an attacker. Logging is absolutely a place to do that. So that's why you want to consider that, and not just, have your logs in whatever account that they appear in. It's, having everything organized in a way that, it's more like a break glass than a actual log repository that you'd be using every day. So yeah, and then instead of just why, we also want to kind of have the right alignment when we're talking, light side, dark side. That was a little bit of a reach. I'm trying. But when we're talking about our alignment, how does, our organization work with, other services? So like, basically, what are we looking to do, and how do we do it at scale? So not only is this going to be one account for your log archive, but Tristan just said like 7 million different sources for logging. So once we're talking about, not just one account, but your whole organization, we're talking about scale, big time. And so things like Control Tower will actually provision a log archive account by default for you. It's a well-architected pattern that you don't even need to use Control Tower for, but it is something that is done by default for this reason. It's basically using these organization level services like CloudTrail and Config and GuardDuty, all the ones that we're just talking about. That can make our centralization very low in the configuration. So that way, we don't have to spend all of that time setting it up. Something like CloudTrail or whatever, SaaS, you're using, can have that set up, that log archive by default, or preferably in your architecture, depending on how you're doing. But for example, if you're going to, open up a completely new greenfield account, then Control Tower is going to give you, let's go with Tristan's 80% earlier. 80% of that architecture, that secure architecture, is right there out of the box. So if you were going to do like a greenfield, you'd start there. That's going to get you 3/4 of the way there.
Yep.
So yeah, that's why I bring that up. Is it's not just some kind of random idea. It's it's baked into our services by design. Then
I was just going to say, as well as just touching upon that, is think of it this way: is Control Tower gets you 80% of the way there, while taking into fact the considerations for all these pieces, right? We mentioned the SRA a lot of the times, and this is the reason. Right here, you just see, okay, CloudTrail, access logs, DNS, flow logs, all the logs that we just mentioned within the log archive account, and then all the potential services. Right? Ideally, these are the conversations we usually have with customers, where it's just like, hey, these are a lot of services we have to enable. Look, think of the SRA as kind of the framework, right? You can add and insert partner services or different SIMs or things of that nature, but this is the framework. And there's reasons why everything is separated in the way and manner and shape and form it is, right? That's why you have an org management, you have a security OU, you have all these different factors, so you can slot what you need in there, right? So that you cover your gaps and that you have known design patterns that you can implement. And to Russ's point, that's where Control Tower comes in. Control Tower gets you 80% of the way there with these factors kind of factored in for it, right? So if there's a disturbance in the force because things aren't balanced within your environment, then you have something to go off of. So just that quick little tidbit there. And I think that's an important part, right? Because another piece of this is you have multiple accounts, and then you go into something like cross accounts. How do I communicate? Russ, what have you seen with cross accounts and the patterns that go with that?
So let's just say yes. Yeah. So cross account patterns, specifically for responders, I need to be able to access those logs, but I also don't want to touch that log archive account directly. We want that to be our boring account, remember? So if I'm getting in there and grabbing things all the time, that's not boring. Well, to some people it is, but it's not in this context. We want boring for security purposes. So I would need something like an IAM role assumed from a dedicated, maybe a break glass incident response account. And so basically you want to be able to use that pattern, especially because you get to be able to check who was the one that accessed those logs when, if it was an actual incident, or if you're looking at, a possible secondary compromise, with an attacker trying to obfuscate. You know, a lot of the times incidents in general do tend to have a smash and grab type of methodology, but not all the time. And there are a lot of attackers that want to try to maintain access to that account. And so they will do stuff like, you know, trying to wipe out evidence or be able to maintain persistence. So you really want to not allow humans to be able to, you know, make any, you know, write or delete actions on the archive. Even an administrator, you know, you really want it to be more of a, you know, many accounts writing, few roles are reading, but no one is deleting. So that way you're not having, you know, a lot of edits, and that's why we don't. Basically, the whole purpose of this is so that way there is no hiding. If there's one delete, you know, bucket in this whole account, that's going to go off like a huge red flag. It's very obvious. So that we don't want to create all of that traffic and data so that way they can use that to hide. So yeah, that's all I have to say really about access patterns.
And just like this poll that we have up, when should humans write or delete permission on a log archive account? Yeah, I think never or never.
50-50.
Yeah, it's 50-50, right? And it's interesting because this is what you're going to take away, this poll, right? And the next time you hear somebody, it's like, oh, I'll just modify this to make whatever connector work. No, this shouldn't be done by humans. The other side of this is you should have pipelines with checks that are making these said changes within your environment, because going through without the proper guardrails is not the, let's say, the best approach to do this, right? So this is where we want to delve in to understanding these different components. And the best way to learn about this is, one, to cue some good old music, and two is to jump into things of legends past. And what are those things? Well, sit down and I'll tell you. It's as
I thought
legend has it.
I thought legends aren't canon anymore.
Gotcha. I see what he did there. But what we're doing here is jumping into our side quest portion of our episode. This is where we dive deep into a customer story or analogy in a way that kind of makes things a little bit more, let's say, visible. And that visible way is I was going with a Star Wars analogy, but it slipped my mind. So we're just going to dive right in. So we bring up our side quest board, which is our visual representation of our customer story, and let us dive in. So the side quest board just helps to kind of chart out our adventures. We don't have hyperdrive, but we do have maximum effort. So we will go forward with, let's say, MedVault Diagnostics. That sounds like a plausible healthcare organization. So let's say they've mastered the force of healthcare data protection. So as a leading digital pathology and medical place, they feel that their whole business relies on data. How do they handle data? How do they look at data? How do they share data? But one of the things is they're a rapidly growing organization. And with great growth comes great S3 bucket sizes. So imagine that they have 284 hospitals. They have 1.2 billion images. They have 9 petabytes of PHI and critical data. So that means they have to conform to HIPAA and high trust. All these type of things when it comes to compliance frameworks. But they thought their defenses were top tier because they had SCPs. They disabled CloudTrail and GuardDuty. They had organizational-wide CloudTrail, let's put it that way. Now, something happened. What happened? Well, there was a gap that was exposed. And within that gap, they pulled their security engineers from around the world, or from Boston Raleigh, a couple office. So they formed their own Jedi Council, and they were like, "Hey, there were logs here, but they're not trustworthy. These are not the logs they are looking for because of the modified lifecycle policies. They see deleted specific objects. Now we are here with unauthenticated random user and authenticated random user with nothing in between. So right now, nothing malicious, nothing anonymous, but every action authorized. Something's going on. How do they chart their path forward? So the question I posed to Russ on this journey, how do we get started? They have a bucket that has, let's say, deleted, modified life cycles. They do not see the logs that they are looking for. How do you go about this?
Oof, I got a lot of questions. How can you access logs in this account? I mean, are you generating logs by and saving logs? Are you, do you have for example, S3 access logs where you know who was accessing the bucket around that time? Especially when you're talking about lifecycle policies, that's something that can be set pretty far in the future, especially if you're talking about, say, like, keep this for 7 days and then 30 days in cold storage and then delete. But if you go and edit that and change it to automatically go delete right away, you can have time where you're losing all of your visibility in logs. So yeah, I've got a lot of questions based on that.
Yes, and that is the key aspect, because if we zoom in, which zooms out the unauthorized user, I think parts of the puzzle is what you mentioned is what kind of logging do we have enabled? What kind of services? And I think in their case that they had things like GuardDuty in place. They had different SCPs. Maybe they even had CloudWatch in their environment too, right? That's all parts of their puzzle. But there seemed to be something missing within their environment. And that item is, hey, how do I know which individual was authorized or not to access things? And what logs that should show up in the CloudTrail logs, right? Is this person went here, but what are the details that come into play? And I think this is where we need to dive in a little bit more, because changing items, there should also be something of, I'll just play around top. Hey, encrypted, right? This data, especially with PHI and sensitive data classification, should be encrypted. So I think, Russ, if they weren't able to see the events occurring, right, because there's so many scattered mechanisms, but there's something missing within their incident response strategy. What is that thing?
I am looking for a centralized log archive account.
Yes, it's almost like this was set up for this episode. So one of those things is exactly that, is if this is your regular account and you have your S3 bucket, now you don't have a centralized logging archive account. All these pieces of the puzzle, let's say you have Security Hub, you have GuardDuty, you have CloudWatch, you have CloudTrail. Something happened from an identity standpoint. And they start to ask certain questions. And what are those questions? Well, are we collecting logs? They should have been asking, can these logs be tampered with by anyone ever? Are these logs encrypted? Right? Would this hold up to regulatory standards? Do we have retention? Is the team generating the logs separated from the team protecting them? And that's where we put back encryption up, face down, and I throw this incident response card in the middle for some reason, right? If you know that icon, I think 10 billion points to you. But I think this is where we take the pause game, Zach Moore's timeout, as I call it, and you start to think about this scenario a little bit more. You have a medical facility. You have so much happening in the environment. They said they had SCPs. They said they had different pieces of the puzzle, but did they have separation of duties? Did they have immutable storage? Or were they using customer KMS keys? These are all pieces of the puzzle to keep you away from the sad music from playing in the background. Because usually when you start to notice this playing is when you're looking for a log and it's not there. And you realize that this wasn't the log you were looking for. So let's dive into that a little bit more, right? So if we were thinking about, hey, that is a very common scenario saying, hey, we have all these protections in place. We have all of these different mechanisms. But we want to get to a point where we understand organizational trails. Because is there one trail to rule them all? Kind of cross franchises, but we'll continue to go down that route. Because if you configure once the management account and it automatically covers every existing and future member account, then you start to say, hey, there's no drift that can happen, right? Because you create trail, is organization, so on and so forth. But then you have auto enrollment. And now you start to see as these pieces, as these accounts start to spawn and start to generate, members can't disable or modify because remember the poll earlier, never, or never. So you want to get into a place where humans can't modify. So what do? You have these auto features baked in so that you have, let's say, visibility and control. A member has visibility, but they can't control because member accounts can see the org trail. They exist. They're writing to them. But that's the key separation in kind of the methodology because that's where account trails come in. Account trails, they're more useful to the devs and the sandbox individuals who need visibility without needing, let's say, cross-account access. They don't need to know everything in every account. They just need to know, hey, we're trying to accelerate this app. We're trying to leverage this. And one of the drivers of this is from a compliance standpoint, right? Because from a compliance auditor, sometimes they want to verify that logs exist within the audited account and within the audited account's boundary itself. And that goes to that defense in depth approach that we keep saying. Because if you have an admin in a member account and they can disable the local account trail, but they can't touch the organizational trail, now somebody from the forensic side can dive a little bit deeper into this because they can look at other things happening within the environment. And then you can look into different tampering type scenarios and things of that nature. But it just sets you up, right? Just like we set up the next question, the next poll, which is going to be, what's your go-to for querying logs? This is a interesting one. I know Russ leans towards 5. But I'm curious, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in the chat. What is your go-to querying logs tool?
Well, so I audit them all. I audit the CloudTrail. I audit the PII. I audit the HIPAA. I audit them all. And anyway, but in my opinion, I'm going to go with 1 actually. And I'm going to say that just because AI is really good with SQL queries. So yep. Athena is my go-to.
Yeah. And I would say we have Kane with 3 and Trigger with 2. There's a bunch of different pieces. So it's interesting. We're kind of split because OpenSearch is really good with the Elasticsearch. And Athena, so it's interesting because usually the way I see Athena used is kind of like in ad hoc scenarios like you would have, right? Where you need to do instant response. So you would have your centralized logging archive account. You would have your logs go there. And then, hey, I need to pull this piece in time. So you would have Glue set up and then you would have Athena in order to kind of quickly query some periods of time. So very interesting. And CloudWatch Log Insights is also a great one as well, right? Because again, it depends on which part of the IR lifecycle. Because we often think of, and I was having a conversation with a customer the other day, is okay, we're thinking an instant response as, hey, something happened, right? Opposed to maybe it's just the application server overload kind of thing, right? Where it's just like the incident is something actually the server is just bogged down. Maybe they released another, if you're a gaming company, maybe you released a brand new DLC or something along those lines, and it's just server can't take it, right? So it's causing this ripple effect within the environment. So car goes with 3, Z goes with 3. So I would say so. The generative AI components and just AI components, the agents that can be leveraged with these different tools are great. So number 5 shouldn't really be an answer for the grep and gulp. Right? If you gulp, yeah, we can have different conversations for a different time. But I think the main piece that we're trying to get to is the understanding that there's a lot of different logs, a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that you have to consider. But the first piece is understanding those different sources and services with certificate knowledges, right? I need to get but I think the other piece is just going on your own knowledge quests, right? Where, as Russ put it, you put on your big brain hat and you start to think about, hey, how can I do these journeys by myself? How can I learn to level up? Well, the easiest way to level up is just going through the basics. And how do you go through the basics? How do you become, let's say, a L100? No, that's not right. How do you become a new recruit? Rogue squadron, rogue leader? No, let's start with new recruit. And the key way to do this is delving into the topics. So we were speaking a lot about CloudTrail to start off with. So an interesting area that you can delve into is exactly that. Is how can you leverage CloudTrail within your environment that makes sense? And then if you know CloudTrail, like, what do you mean leverage CloudTrail that makes sense? CloudTrail is there. Well, I mean, is how are you consuming CloudTrail? How are you thinking about CloudTrail? You're not going through all the CloudTrail logs manually. Hopefully not, right?
I don't recommend it.
Don't recommend that. You want to make sure that you have an understanding of the basics of, okay, what is the event history? What does the 90 days get me? What am I looking for? And the key way to be that L100 is to be curious and dive in. And one of those ways you can dive in is just make a change and then go back and look in CloudTrail to see what happened. It will say who called this and what called this and why was this called. All those kind of things. That's how you start to build up the muscle of saying, hey, this is how CloudTrail works. This is how it logs the event history. This is how long the history is going to be saved for. And then you can start to dive into the other forms that we were speaking about, like the VPC Flow Logs, especially, I'm logging IP traffic, the ins and outs, the ones and zeros. But I think a key part of the L100 is to keep awareness of what each logging source does and which ingests that logging source, to put it simply, right? Because we talk about VPC with CloudTrail, but there's different things to keep in mind. Because if you have all these log sources, part of the optimization pieces of this is making sure that, okay, you retain multiple versions of objects within S3, and then you switch to the different tiering platforms and all those good things. But if you have everything going to one location or is being ingested, do you need to keep everything? And that's the question that's fit on your, let's say, based on your compliance, your industry, all those kind of things, right? Other part of that is getting to understand something like the shared responsibility model, right? Which is a key piece of the puzzle. Why? Because AWS responsibility, security of the cloud, your responsibility, security in the cloud. And what comes of that, right? These are the different concepts that you want to get to, right? So these are certain things that you want to delve into one by one until eventually you see the level up sign and you become a Rogue Squadron person, right? This is where you get the cool suit. You get the cool jumpsuit, right? Because you start to understand more parts of the puzzle. You start to feel and know how everything fits together. And how does everything fit together? Well, we kind of went through that a little bit. That's through that centralized logging archive account, right? So if you
midichlorians.
Yeah.
That's how everything fits together.
See, there's things we don't talk about, and that's one of them. So log archiving account and centralized logs, we went through this. We already got to the Rogue Squadron just by having this conversation, this talk, this, let's say, virtual session. So understanding S3 object lock is another one, right? Write once, read many. Do you know about worm, right? And not the dance from wrestling. We want to know about how you configure S3 object locks in your environment. Right? This is where the regulatory compliance. And to Russ's point, we're speeding through because we got 4 minutes left. Query AWS CloudTrail logs. How do you query it? SQL, right? SQL. However you want to say it, you want to know a method in order to query these different pieces of logs because this is an important part of your strategy. Important part. I say it 3 times for the people on the other side of the internet because if you can leverage the queries, you can eventually become that rogue leader. And that rogue leader's job is to take a step back and look at everything holistically in a way that says, hey, we have this great big spaceship, this circular spaceship with many defenses. What is our weak point? Well, that weak point is pretty much pointed out by going through step by step every piece of the security reference architecture, because that architecture will walk you through that, again, step by step, the security foundations. And I say this in a certain way because this is not necessarily, hey, you have to enable this block of services in here. No, that's not where it's coming from. It's coming from the idea that these are the building blocks of your environment. It calls out AWS organization account, the guardrails, the foundational pieces, and then you can mix and match the different services based on your needs. But look out for those potential gaps, those potential, let's say, wampum-sized rat holes in your environment.
Yep.
And once you do that, you'll start to level up not only yourself, but your organization, your security posture, and let's say somewhat of your pop culture knowledge. Another way to do that is, Russ, what is that way?
That way is to create an incident response plan.
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Russ will give you a lollipop if you create an incident response plan. And that is the prop for ending today's show. It is a great lollipop. But also, the way to end this is may the 4th be with you. Take care. Have a good one. Happy Monday.